For most people, Sun Tzu is the perfect name to decorate entrepreneurial posts mixed with battlefield generals and quotes pulled from books that no one has really opened and read. We tend to know him as a philosopher of victory. He's portrayed as someone who cracked the psychology of conflict, almost as a mystical figure. But this doesn't even come close to the real issue. Because once you strip away the slogans and the legends, a far more interesting and slightly uncomfortable truth emerges. Sun Tzu was not focused on winning wars. He was focused on avoiding them. What concerned him wasn't glory, discipline, or domination. It was cost. And in a world slowly consuming itself through endless wars, Sun Tzu became one of the rare thinkers who clearly articulated a truth long before others dared to acknowledge it. For any state, the greatest danger is not the enemy across the field. The real danger is the bill that arrives when the war is over. Most people assume the art of war is about fighting. In reality, the book is largely about finance. Welcome to Traces of Finance, where money, power, and history intertwine, and where nothing is ever as simple as it seems. To truly understand Sun Tzu's financial intelligence, we must understand the era he lived in. These ideas did not emerge in a vacuum. They were forged in a world cracking under the weight of its own ambitions. In China, the late spring and autumn period and the early Warring States era around the 6th and 5th centuries BCE were defined by fragmented kingdoms. Each believed it could unify the world, and each drained its treasury trying to do so. War had become continuous. Alliances formed, collapsed, and formed again. Armies grew larger with every passing decade. Aristocratic chariot duels gave way to massive infantry mobilizations that required food, metal, supply lines, and taxation on a scale no previous generation could have imagined. States were no longer just fighting wars. They were stress-testing their economies. When a king sent his army on campaign, he was unknowingly borrowing from the future, and more often than not, when the bill came due, he couldn't pay it. The Western imagination often romanticizes ancient war as tactical and heroic. But in this period, war was, above all else, logistical. The moment an army moved, the meter started running. Chariots, grain, horses, craftsmen, armorers, cooks, blacksmiths, porters, every one of them had to be paid or fed. A campaign lasting more than a few months could bankrupt a small state. One that dragged on for more than a year could bring down even a large one. Yet kingdoms were trapped in a cycle of insecurity and kept fighting anyway. This was an arms race long before the modern world had a name for it, and it pushed the entire political system to its breaking point. This was the world Sun Tzu stepped into, not as a quiet sage sitting apart from reality, but as a strategist forced to confront an economic crisis while wearing military armor. In the West, we often imagine him as an ancient CEO whisperer. In truth, Sun Tzu was far closer to a risk manager. He examined the numbers. He thought in terms of costs, timelines, and logistics. And he realized that the way states were conducting war was fundamentally unsustainable. If the treasury collapsed, victory meant nothing. But most rulers never understood this. To them, the greatest danger was the enemy army. To Sun Tzu, it was their own spending. That is why the key sentence in The Art of War appears before deception, terrain, or morale right at the very beginning of the book. War is of vital importance to the state. Not glorious, not honorable. Vital, meaning dangerous, destructive, and powerful enough to annihilate the very society it claims to defend. Throughout the rest of the book, Sun Tzu explains how to keep war limited, controlled, and as inexpensive as possible. And in doing so, he reveals his true obsession, minimizing financial risk. Even his most famous ideas are simply economic principles expressed through another language. When he says, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, this is not mysticism. It is cost avoidance. It is the ancient equivalent of achieving your objective without wasting capital. His warning that no nation has ever benefited from a prolonged war is a purely financial truth. As campaigns drag on, the state's capacity to function erodes. That is why speed, efficiency, intelligence, and psychological pressure mattered so much to him, because they were cheaper tools than armies. Sun Tzu was not trying to win wars. He was trying to prevent states from bankrupting themselves in the process of trying to win them. To understand how revolutionary this thinking was, we need to understand how war had traditionally been conducted. For centuries, aristocratic elites fought ritualized conflicts where honor mattered more than outcomes. Economic cost was barely considered, but as populations grew and wars expanded, that mindset became indistinguishable from suicide. States were forced to standardize currencies, reform tax systems, and build bureaucracies. War became a national project and simultaneously an existential financial risk. Sun Tzu saw this before anyone else. War could no longer be a stage for noble gestures. It required cold, emotionless financial analysis. That is why Sun Tzu stands as an anomaly in world history. While most military thinkers glorified conflict, he treated war like a balance sheet. He calculated resource depletion, supply chains, and opportunity cost before those concepts even existed. Because he understood one thing clearly: every decision made on the battlefield is ultimately a decision about national payment. If you calculate wrong, you don't just lose soldiers, you lose the state itself. When you read The Art of War this way, it stops feeling like an ancient poem and starts feeling like a spreadsheet. Sun Tzu's message is simple but deeply unsettling. Power is not measured by how hard you can strike, but by how much striking you can afford. And history keeps showing us the same lesson again and again. If an empire lacks financial discipline, it will eventually pay the price. History does not repeat itself, but if you fail to understand it, you will still pay the cost. If this perspective gave you a new way of thinking, don't forget to subscribe. History always has answers, and I show you where to find them.